Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine, Taylor-Klaus, and Diane, Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I am about to do a three-part series, and so I'm welcoming our first guest in this series today, John Paul Simon. John Paul, thank you for being here. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Elaine.
So you're going to be able to read about John Paul in the show notes, and I'll get him to explain how he got to be here. But I want to set the stage for this conversation, everyone, because I'm doing a three-part series because it has come to my attention that there is a great deal of people in our community whose kids are struggling with online use of adult material and who are getting exposed at a very early age, who are experiencing it on a regular basis. I read a statistic recently that shocked even me, that teenage boys, 8 out of 10 teenage boys are using online pornography every day. I found that to be shocking. And we're going to do some more digging and make sure we're getting you accurate statistics. We've done a lot of work to get you some really good resources. So I'm very, very excited to have this first of three conversations, this one with John Paul Simon from New Jersey, and who's going to tell you what his background is that brings him to this conversation today. But I want to have this really important, authentic conversation because I understand how hard it is as a parent to talk to our kids about these issues. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and y'all, it's important. My son told me recently, and he's 23, and he's at that age where a lot of kids were exposed to the internet very early before there were internet controls and parent controls. And the term he used was, he said, "Mom, there's not a kid my age who hasn't been traumatized by the internet." And that really struck me when we think about everything else we've been dealing with the last 5 years and the pandemic and everything else. I don't want to lose sight on how important it is that we be addressing these issues that are going under the radar because nobody wants to talk about them. So we're going to have some frank conversations. John Paul, thank you again for being here. Let's start by, why don't you give people a sense of what you're doing, what your role is, your background, and what brings you to this conversation, what makes you the right person for me to kick off this series with.
Sure thing. And thank you for having me here. I'm excited for the kickoff. It's a conversation that I think a lot of us folks know it's on the table, but can get either a bit scary, uncomfortable. So I'm definitely down to talk about it today. Again, my name is John Paul Simon. I'm from the greater Bergen County of New Jersey. And I wear a lot of hats, and so I'll try not to ramble on in terms of my professional approach, but I am proud and love telling people that I have the privilege of working for Care Plus New Jersey, based in Paramus. They're one of the largest community mental health agencies in Bergen County. We serve a multitude of different towns, cities, and counties in northern New Jersey. For myself, throughout my career, I've actually worked with the adolescent population and ultimately the parents and caregivers of the adolescent population. Sometimes people forget that parents and families have a huge role and impact in a student and a child's development in a school community. Most recently, I became part of what's known as the New Jersey Statewide Student Support Services, which is a statewide initiative that rolled out in September. It's a multi-million-dollar grant that makes mental health and prevention-based services accessible to every public school district in the state of New Jersey. And that's where I am and where our conversation leaves us today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. So let's go into the conversation. And what we decided to do, y'all, before we started was to look at this issue at different ages and stages, right? So what John Paul's a lot of the focus is on prevention. There's kind of, when you look at dealing with any issue from our lens, we're always looking at, there's a prevention side of it, and then there's a management side of it. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about prevention and in terms of how do we support our kids at different ages and stages when there's all of this stuff out there that's available to them that is developmentally not healthy for them. And sure, we can say put in online supports, and we all know that kids are wise and capable, and where there's a will, there's a way. So where do you want to start us off on this conversation?
Guess we start at the beginning, right? I'm still shocked to see little 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds walking around with iPads being far better than I at navigating at it. But it just goes to show that not necessarily the navigation, but the access of technology is introduced to all of our kids at a very young age. So being able to spend some time at looking at internet usage, tech usage through each developmental stage, I do think it's rather important. I know some parents are going to be like, John Paul, like, I'm not giving my kid an iPad or a smartphone at the age of 3 or 4, but ultimately those kiddos can and do come into contact with access.
So what I think I'm hearing you saying is that starting at the beginning means paying attention even when they're very little, when we're giving them devices, to be conscious that we've got whatever controls we need on those devices before we give them to them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sure, absolutely. I think when we think prevention, full abstinence is like the 100% thought that a lot of folks think sometimes, right? The best way that I will make sure that my child is away from danger is to completely bar them or not provide that access piece. But I think even before that, and you had mentioned it with your son, that idea of the internet is not that old.
No.
But when it first rolled out, and I'm not going to do any jokes about our former vice president inventing the internet or anything like that, but it almost felt like this strange frontier that there was no roadmap for, and the chances of running into something harmful were higher than running into something useful. But I would say we're at an age where the internet does come with a warning label at this point. And parents, caregivers, and adults who come into contact with kids, I'm going to give a piece of advice that seems very logical and commonsensical, but it's read the care label.
Okay.
Read the instructions and honor the instructions, because I think a lot of times just to purely dismiss the internet or tech as something that's quote unquote dangerous or harmful can inconsequentially at times sort of remove the positive aspects of it, right? There's good and bad to many things. So I think starting at the beginning, especially at a foundational age, foundation equals prevention. If you start your kid off with that understanding of this is a responsibility, this is a tool, here are the goods, here are the bads, here are the side effects, I think you're at a good place.
So when you look at them and say, okay, this is a responsibility, this is a tool, we talk about that with teenagers with cars. When you're giving a little kid a device, and it doesn't have to be a little kid, we could be talking elementary age kids, a device almost as a babysitter, there's this two sides of the coin. On the one hand, we want them to have it because it makes our lives easier. On the other hand, you're saying we need to make sure they see it as a privilege or a responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned it perfectly, because the go-to attack and knock towards parents at times is, oh, so you're a parent who gives your kid the iPad so they can watch Paw Patrol for hours on end. While certainly there's an aspect of convenience to, we got to sit this kid down so he doesn't tear the restaurant apart, or we got to sit this kid down because we're driving 4 hours to upstate and we want to be sane before we go on a hike. There's value to that, but I think at the same part too is there's this acknowledgement of, I am aware that I'm about to hand a tangible object to my child. That doesn't negate, and I promise you, it's a beautiful thing. It doesn't negate my role as a parent. It doesn't my role as the decision maker. And that's a bit of the separation between, again, this is common sense, this is logic, but I feel like it needs to be reinforced. This is the difference between your iPad versus your babysitter, your iPad versus the actual parent. So if the parent's there to say, listen, we're going to spend some time with it before I leave you on your own, then I think it's better than just that cold handoff.
So when you're thinking about this, like what age are you talking about that we're preparing our kids for how they're using it?
The old-fashioned man in me wants to say, you got to wait until they're 5th grade, when they're just at the end of elementary school and ready to step into middle school. Because for the parents out there, we all know that middle school is the new high school. They've inherited all the increased stressors, and lack of a better term, the high school drama has now entered middle school. But let's be serious. If you say 5th grade as the bare minimum, you walk into any elementary school in any town, USA, you see the push for STEM, you see the push for tech. I would say even in 1st grade, children have access to technology. Even if they're not the drivers of it, you walk into a classroom, even a kindergarten classroom, there's a smart board there.
So
Again,
the problem isn't the technology, though. So what's the real problem that you're speaking to that we're not speaking to?
I think it's ownership.
Ownership of their ability to access it unfettered?
I think it's being able to prime, and again, it's that preparation piece. If you've been in the Boy Scouts or if you're Girl Scout, that's one of the main skills that you truly learn. It's preparation. Utilize this tool. Preparation for your youth to say, your hands will be interacting with this. Your hands will be on this. Take away the idea of technology. It was the same conversation that I've had when I first learned about Play-Doh. When I first learned about my G.I. Joe toys, the little green army men, there was always a conversation about, this is how you play with it. Don't eat the Play-Doh, right? Or if you don't put the light bright piece into your ear, it might get stuck there. It's all parallel archetypal conversations that parents have with their children. I think the sense of, oh, it's technology, it's unknown. Well, yes, it is a bit unknown in terms of comparison of how long items have existed, but it's a similar plane. And I hope that can alleviate some of the anxiety that parents go through when the awesome questions that you're posing right now are probably the questions that parents are asking themselves month by month and year by year as their kids get older. How do we know we're having the right conversation? How do I know I'm doing the right thing?
So awesome. So what I'm hearing from you is that sort of for those of you who are parents of younger kids, there's a real sense of owning that we are giving them something powerful and having proactive preparatory conversations with them about these devices so that we are in conversation with them about how they're using this tool, right? So we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back and talk to parents of pre-adolescents and adolescents and figure out how does that conversation shift as kids crest 5th grade and beyond, okay? Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. Welcome back, everybody. My guest is John Paul Simon, and we are having a conversation about healthy access to technology in kind of preparation for a conversation about how do we talk to our kids about inappropriate material that's on the internet. So we've talked a little bit about very little kids and elementary age kids. As we move into pre-adolescence and adolescence years, how do those conversations need to change for parents when they're talking? Again, today's conversation is preventatively. What do parents need to be thinking about in terms of these younger age demographics?
I definitely want to mention taking a pause and reminding yourself as a parent that in this life journey, there are mile markers and milestones. And for pre-adolescents, be mindful and really truly honor. And parents of kids who are going through puberty, you probably know this way better than I do right now, is there are certain biological and chemical shifts that your child is going through that may exacerbate their drive to seek, to act, and to think. And so again, while not to remove responsibility of technology, but I think one way to remedy your direction and guidance is to sort of say, in relation to where my child is currently in their lives and in relation to the environment that they live in, whether it's, again, that life stage, whether it's the literal community that you live in, the school buildings that they reside in, just be aware of it. Sometimes parents are like, oh, not my child, or this doesn't happen around here. Well, guess what? Because of the globalization and the introduction of internet access, a lot of those boundaries are gone. And a lot of learning and experiencing can happen instantaneously, even in Nowhere, USA.
Even in Nowhere, USA. So right now, if we're talking pre-adolescence, you're talking kids roughly, what, 10 to 14?
Yep, that's right? Volatile, in-between phase. I'm still a child, but mom, I am this close to becoming a teen, that preteen stage, right?
Right. And so for these kids, what I think I'm hearing you saying is we need to keep our heads out of the sand and understand that based on what's happening with them biologically, they may be seeking things that we don't even think they're thinking about yet.
Sure. Yeah. And then not to call pre-adolescence a traumatic time, although for some folks it can be, both the kiddos and the parents, but trauma and transition are sometimes interchangeable. And so just being aware that your child, dependent on what grade they are facing multiple transitions in their lives, that access to tech might speed up that volatility, or in fact, it might serve as a tool to guide them through it, but it is outside of the screen and in real life, a very shaky era in a young child's life.
Right. So it's a very shaky era. And even if you think your kid is so good, it's not my kid that's dealing with this. All of our kids are going to start having some exposure in their environment, because even if they aren't, other kids are going to begin to seek some of these kinds of materials. And let's call out what we're talking about. What are the things that we're worried about them seeing?
And again, it's like this generational split. In my experience as a school-based therapist, I would be shocked, and I'm sure some of your listeners and parents might be shocked also, but kids of that age, not just stumbling upon adult material online, whether it's through a Google search or an image search, they wind up on websites that are for adults. And again, I promise you, I'm not trying to scare folks, but being called for students engaging in incidents where photos of themselves and classmates are being shared. And we as a nation, and I love the United States, there's this sort of history of shame and difficulty in the approach of addressing sexual health. And I know that's not the main topic for today, but it is something that parallels it because I promise you, either through tech or through in real life, parents, if you're not speaking to your children, someone else will speak to them.
And what is it that we want? And I don't want to take sexual health off the table for this conversation because I agree with you. I think it's a very important context that if kids are being raised in a world that tells them that their sexuality is shameful, that their bodies are shameful, then that shame will be reinforced when they do get exposures that we don't expect them to get.
Sure.
So what's the message that we want parents to be talking to them about for this pre-adolescent age?
I'll start with a very general statement, and it's to fight information with information.
Okay.
And again, the internet technology is a tool, and if you don't set, I guess, landmarks and expectations for your child, it'll be the wild, wild west like it was during Al Gore's time. And I think you prime your child to say, this is what exists in the web. And this is what us as a family, this is what my expectations as a parent. And I love the fact that you're a coach. So I'm going to try to sound like a coach right now. It's always been, so in therapy, when I do family therapy, I ask folks when they're reprimanding their children or speaking to their children to speak of values versus the behavior.
Yes.
So it's almost like they make a mistake or they get caught. My message, or the message that I hope parents will always provide primarily, is that's not who we are.
Yeah.
That's not what we do. Or I don't like this, but I've leaned into it a bit recently. It's you're better than that. We're better than that. And then you go down, and we go back to the chapter before the break of what we learned during early childhood is you go back to the foundational core beliefs that you've set about the usage of this tool. When we are using this, it's something helpful. Is this helpful or is it hurtful?
So there's kind of two places, like when they're young, we're starting to talk to them about this is a tool and how to use this tool consciously. As you move into pre-adolescence, now you're talking about how to use the tool consciously, but also how do you avoid harm? And what I'm aware of is that kids don't see it as harmful. They don't understand the ways in which it's harmful. And I know there are a lot of parents who are like, I don't want to talk to them about it because I don't want to give them the idea. I don't want to put this in their head.
Sure.
So how do you speak to that concern?
Well, I mentioned earlier, right? If you're not talking about it, someone else is talking about it. And a bit of my approach in the therapy realm is I like the narrative approach. And it's like there's always a story being written. If you don't take ownership of that pen, then someone else is going to write that story. And so the story of, again, health, sexuality, if you're not willing to go to that uncomfortable place, somebody who has thrived, and again, I apologize for sounding dramatic. I'm dramatic. I'll be real with you.
Go with it.
An evil lens to it.
Yeah.
It will get to your child's ear. And I think that's something, it's almost like that comic book superhero or just Shakespearean approach, right? You address it with the good. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but I don't think there's a way to minimize. I in no way make any efforts to negate the fact that it's sketchy.
Yeah.
It's weird. I still, as a therapist, when I work with parents and parenting, I'm like, man, are we calling it the birds and the bees talk still?
Right.
Sort of reference these days. And the best part is this, Elaine, and it'll be different for any listener out there. You get to choose. You get to choose that approach. You get to write your playbook. If you feel like, hey, there's a certain line that I think I can cross or meet my child at, then I'm going to take it there. I'll do my research. I'll listen to great podcasts, right? I'll get coaches if I need to. I'll talk to my neighbors. I'll speak to the schools. that's the community aspect of being able to empower your role as a parent.
Yeah. What's coming up for me as you're sharing this, and in several previous lifetimes ago, I was a sexual health educator.
Ah.
And what I remember learning about the research at that time was that whatever information you give your kids, while we're afraid they may be taking it as permission, the research actually shows that the more you talk to them about your values, which is what you're speaking about, what you think is important, the more likely that is to delay their engagement in the activity. If they know what you think, they're more likely to be able to say to their friends, yeah, no, my mom would kill me, or I can't do that, whatever it is, to
Yeah.
find their excuse not to, because they know what you think. And one of the things I hear you saying very clearly throughout this conversation is we are the leaders here, and we have to step into a leadership role with our kids and proactively talk about the gifts of the internet, but also the dangers, and
Yes.
prepare them for that. Is that kind of the
Yes.
station?
No, yeah, absolutely. That's so good. This idea, and I promise you, there isn't some invisible enemy, although there might be, but there's this sense that when I speak to parents sometimes, they express this feeling of helplessness and undermining when it comes to their role as parents, right? You're told that you need to fall in line with what society is saying, which is true for any functioning society, or you need to make this decision, but there has to be this flexibility of thought. There has to be a grain of what legacy am I, and again, this goes back to the hero talk again. What is the legacy that I want for myself and for my children and their children? And if you're not talking about, and I love this idea of value, because especially when it goes down to the more like sexual health portion of the tie-in to internet usage, there's this idea that sex within itself is an indicator of negative values. It's sort of negotiating and navigating the pleasure principle. And I know in your show, you often refer to complex kiddos, right? The
Right.
complex. And for me, the complexity of children needs to be acknowledged, honored, and respected during these conversations. If you're not willing to address something that's complex, the ownership that your child, especially during pre-adolescence, the ownership that they'll take on a complex issue like sexual health will be limited just to pure gratification, pure pleasure versus, wow, what if I actually prompt my child to talk about it's not an easy thing.
Yeah. That is, and I hate to have to end this conversation, and we have to end this conversation. So we might come back. We'll see where this series takes us. But before we do, why don't you tell people how they can find out a little bit more about you, or the
Absolutely.
resources you want to refer us to?
So I'll point you over to New Jersey. This is going to be such a Jersey thing to do. I promise you we're not representative of the entire nation, but you'll find some cool things about the team that I'm part of, which again is the NJ4S team, the Bergen County team. I know the team's going to drop the website somewhere in a link or
We'll have it
something.
in the show notes. Yep.
And start there. We have
Okay.
resources, we've got events that are accessible, and just continue learning. For the parents out there, I loved going to school when I was a little kid. Never stop learning.
I love that. Never ever stop learning. Okay, so we're going to wrap this conversation. Is there anything you feel like, I know we didn't get to talk to teenagers. We're going to have to pin that for another conversation, which is fine. Is there anything you feel like you want to go back and highlight from today's conversation, or something maybe we haven't hit that you want to make sure you don't leave here without sharing?
I don't think it's something I necessarily left out, but if you allow me to just reinforce a
Yeah.
bit of a point that I try to make in the clinical world and just in the world that I have in speaking with community is continue writing your story. Just continue taking ownership. You are the most important author in this story about you. Don't forget that.
So what does that mean for parents when they're raising kids in this arena?
When you hear that doubt in your head, when you hear your own voice criticizing yourself, acknowledge it, but then also remind yourself that there are productive and positive things on the way. This is cheesy, but I tell my clients this, or I talk to it about therapy all the time. Like, victory is already written for you. You get to just edit the chapters. A positive and an awesome life is there for you, I promise. Just write it the way you want it.
Beautiful. And so what I want to play with that, with your permission, for the parents in my community is we deal with complex kids. There's lots of opportunities for us to doubt ourselves. There's lots of opportunities for us to second guess. And what I hear you saying as in the context of own your narrative is also trust your intuition, trust your instincts, know what you want for yourself, for your kids, for your family, and keep advocating for it, moving towards what you know that you in your heart of hearts know is healthy and strong and what's best for yourself and your family. When you lead, your family will follow. And no matter what happens, and you can't control everything that happens, but you can control how you respond to it. And if you set the stage for your kids to feel safe talking to you about these complex issues, when they are exposed to something, they're much, much more likely to come talk to you about it. And at the end of the day, that's what you want more than anything. Because you can put your head in the sand, but that is absolutely not the healthiest choice for your kiddo. So before we wrap, we always like to ask our guests, do you have a favorite quote or motto that you'd like to share with our community?
I'm a quote person. I'm a movie, book reference type of person. I'm going to leave the team. I'm going to leave you, your audience members. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to leave a song quote and a post-it that I've had on my high school office that was up for years. It's from a song by Lindsey Sterling and Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness. And I forget the name of it, but it was a Disney movie.
Okay.
But the quote is this, and I promise you it's as impactful, as simple as it is. And it's a consistent reminder that I provided high school students carrying the battles of anxiety, ADHD, depression, you name it, throughout their years in those school hallways. And the quote goes, even though you're scared, you're stronger than you know.
I love that. I think that's great for parents too. Even though you're scared, you're stronger than you know. And what a beautiful way to end. Thank you. I appreciate it. John Paul, thank you for the beautiful work you're doing in the world. And thank you for coming on and having a really important conversation with me and kickstarting this series of conversations with me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm excited to follow along. I'm literally going to go back and probably listen to the rest of your episodes because you're doing amazing work. I'm getting my goosebumps in right now. And I'm going to, ask our marketing folks, I want to get the appropriate contact because I do think there's a different conversation that needs to occur because, well, you've been in the state of New Jersey, but I particularly feel that your message would land very well in my county. So I want to connect through that lens.
Beautiful. I love that. More to come on that. To those of you who are listening, thank you. Thanks for tuning into this difficult conversation, for sticking with us through it. I hope you'll stay and make sure to tune in to the rest of the series as it unfolds. If this episode hasn't reinforced our closing, I don't know what will. But before I close, a reminder to you to take a moment. What's an insight that you're taking away from this conversation? From all the things we've been talking about, what's one aha, what's one insight, what's one moment of clarity that you want to bring forward with you into your life in the coming weeks? And as always, remember that what you're doing for yourself and for your kids, your leadership in this space, it makes an enormous difference. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.